The first time I met Srila Prabhupada was in Calcutta, November 1971. I was a Peace Corps volunteer then, not too far from Calcutta, and I used to go into Calcutta for milkshakes. And I was there, and I saw a big poster, Hare Krishna Festival. Well, I was very interested in the Hare Krishna movement. I was curious if it was bona fide or not, because I'd been attracted to the mantra in the West. So I immediately took a trolley to the festival. And at the festival there was, I believe it was Giriraj, Brahmachari then, speaking. Prabhupada was sitting there on the pandal. And it was an audience of all Bengali men. It was a fancy part of Calcutta. They were all in suits and ties, and the devotees were all in dhotis. And then the speaker was saying, "You have given up. You are chasing after the garbage we have given up." Finally, after having lived in India for 6 months, somebody said something that made sense. And I was intrigued. He says, you are chasing after the garbage we have given up. So then I went to the temple afterwards. I found out where the temple was and went over there, and there was Prabhupada. And they said, "Would you like to come in and meet Prabhupada?" So I said, "Why, sure." So I walked in, offered a little respect, and so Prabhupada, there was same Calcutta temple, nothing's changed. And so the room was just a room full of mattresses with sheets, and Prabhupada was sitting behind a low table, and there was a few devotees in the room. And when I walked in, some devotees were arguing in the back of the room. I was thinking, this is a pure devotee, and they're arguing? They can just ask him. Because I'd understood little about what some of the philosophy was. Of course, I understood later those devotees, at least one of them had shortly thereafter blooped, so wasn't one who was accepting authority. Anyway, I was wondering what was going on. Then Prabhupada said, "So you have a question?" And I said, "Yes. You are pushing this Hindu view, but why not Buddhism?" Kind of a stupid question. So then Prabhupada gave what I think was a very typical response for Prabhupada. "So what does the Buddha say?" Heck, if I knew what the Buddha said. So I went back to my Oriental Philosophy 1 course and said, well, Eightfold Noble and Fourfold Path and this and that. And then I turned to Prabhupada and said, well, actually, I don't know what the Buddha said. So he said, well, why are you advocating that path? Or why are you want to know the Buddhist path if you don't even know what the path is? Why are you asking me that question? So at that point, I became a little humbler and just sat and listened.
One time we were in Prabhupada's room, and every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday we would have kirtan in the temple, and alternative days we would go up to his room for darshan. One time we were sitting in his room, and Prabhupada said, "Oh, Saradiya has very nice tilak. Krishnadas has no tilak." And he went around to each and every devotee, pointing out whether they had tilak or not, which indicated that it was very important to him that we wear tilak.
I remember one morning early on, he said, "Can you make halava?" And I hadn't had much Vedic cooking experience. I was a cook by nature, but hadn't done much before I'd done this work. And so I said, "I really don't know the recipe, but I'll call the temple and find out what the recipe is." And so I called the temple, couldn't find anyone who knew what the recipe was. I knew what the ingredients were, but the amounts I didn't know. So coming from a healthy, hippie kind of background, one of the reasons I didn't join the temple was I didn't want to give up raw diet. And I remember my first donation to the temple, my first service, was a 50-pound can of honey, because I felt like we shouldn't be eating sugar. So I speculated, and I made halava with honey. And if anyone knows, you end up with something you could play baseball with. So I remember I made this preparation, I put it in the bowl, and I took it in with his breakfast, and he didn't touch it. There was one small dent out of the corner where he was able to get his spoon into it a little bit. And he was very kind, he didn't say anything to me about it. Later on, Kartikeya Swami made halava that came out fluffy and light, and Prabhupada ate 2 or 3 servings. He said, "This is halava, find out the recipe." So I did. And just for the record, 2½ water, 1 farina, 1 butter, and 1 1/3 sugar. And the extra water, it was more than what the recipe book called for, but it made it very light. So I've always made halava with that recipe since. never honey again.
I remembered being so shaking, and Prabhupada called us up and gave us a name, and when he called us up, there was many devotees, and you're just trying to remember, not to screw up, how to say the right thing and remember and do it right, and so Prabhupada said, your name is Mahabhuti, and then he gave some. Mahabhuti means great intelligence. And he started giving some thing out, but I was so awestruck, just like surrendering to Prabhupada, that I didn't even know what he said. I just became dumbfounded. Prabhupada was like that. Normally I have like somewhat of a Kshatriya mentality, but in presence of Prabhupada, I was someone who could control me.
When I first met Prabhupada in November '71, right after that I became vegetarian, but I still ate eggs. So when I saw Prabhupada, I said to him very proudly, "Oh, I'm vegetarian now," after I met you. And he said, so are the pigeons and the monkeys, who are big rascals. So I became very humble at that moment.
The main thing was cleanliness and punctuality. As a matter of fact, he reiterated that over and over, that is the prime prerequisite for a cook or a pujari, is cleanliness and punctuality. Even later on, I remember once in India, we were traveling, Jamuna and Guru Das and the original group of devotees that went to India. We would go to villages. We would stay in wealthy people's homes, and then we would go out for engagements in villages. And once we went to a village, and they took us to the local Krishna temple, and it was just a little small hole-in-the-wall kind of a place. And the altar was very dirty. The pujari was wild. He had his front teeth missing, and he would offer very quickly and then turn around and throw the water in our faces. And the main thing was the cleanliness. I saw that it was just very unkempt. So as we were leaving, I asked Prabhupada in the car, I said, Srila Prabhupada, I have a question about this temple. He said, ask me later. So later, when there was no one else there, he said, what is your question about the temple? And I said, well, you've taught us that cleanliness is essential in deity worship. And this temple was very dirty. And I just wondered, is Krishna really there? And he said, yes, Krishna is there. He said, our standard is cleanliness. You keep that standard. Don't judge anyone else by what they do. And he, several times during the time I was with him, he either said to me or I heard him say, all the rules and regulations are meant for us to apply on ourselves alone, not to judge anybody else. He said, I saw that pujari. He said he was very different, but his heart was for Krishna, and therefore that's what we see.
One time Guru Das was making a videotape of the deities and the kirtan that was going on, and Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada indicated to Guru Das that he should take a videotape of me and my friend, Ali Krishna. We were both wearing nylon saris that were matching. Hers was pink and mine was green. And so we were dancing together in step. And Prabhupada indicated that he should shoot us for the video. So that was very kind of him to notice us.
On one of the morning walks that we were on, he gave Ganesham, now Bhakti Tirtha Swami, some personal instructions. And I thought that was so wonderful. And at the same time, I was a little transcendently jealous because I wish I had some. So we went on the walk the next morning, and actually Prabhupada, I asked a question. I said, Prabhupada, we're visiting all these professors and these big universities, and we're just, we were just a graduate from San Diego State, and we're trying to represent you well. I said, I didn't even quite finish the sentence, and he looked at me and he said, and I was feeling like, how can we, help be better qualified and help this? And Prabhupada looked at me, he says, Krishna is already helping. So as if we thought we were doing the work. So Prabhupada was really good at bringing us back to reality. But then he said, anyway, he said, you just pray to Krishna. Te sam satrayuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mama payanti te. And then he goes, you know what that means? And I was kind of, and then he translated it. And he explained to those who constantly worship me, if I give them the intelligence, how to come back to me. So he said, you will pray like that? And I said, yes, Prabhupada. I said, every day? Yes, Srila Prabhupada. So he said, in that way, Krishna will supply you the intelligence. So that was like one of the most wonderful times for me with Prabhupada, that he gave personal instruction, which we try to follow. That it's so, Prabhupada is such a wonderful personality that, you know, that one could dedicate his life fully to just simply trying to enact his desires.